Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Tech Talk on Dynamics 365 Procurement Agent Impact Analysis. My name is Adi Vijay Senior Solution Architect from FastTrack, and I will be moderating and also presenting in this session. This session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. We encourage you to use the Q&A panel at any time to ask questions regarding content or to request support. In today's Tech Talk, and as all other events at Microsoft, we just wanted to remind everyone to celebrate our diversity and be inclusive with everyone attending by being aware, friendly, respectful, patient, and welcoming. With this, we'll get it started. The presenters for our session today are Lisa Scholz, our Senior Product Manager, AI ERP, Ahmed Siem, Software Engineer, AI ERP, and myself, Adi Vijay Shankar, Senior Solution Architect, AI ERP. So this is the agenda for a Tech Talk today. We'll start with the Procurement Agent Impact Analysis, where we'll provide an overview followed by the business process flow and the use cases. Then we'll get to how does Impact Analysis Agent determine when there is an impact. Then we'll get to how to configure the impact analysis. Following that, we'll get to the technical architecture, timeline, monetization, resources, and eventually we can get to the Q&A panel. But again, I encourage you to use the Q&A panel throughout to ask your questions. Now, as you're aware, the procurement agent comprises of supplier communications agent and impact analysis agent. For this Tech Talk, we're focusing on how the impact analysis agent is triggered and the different types of input it can consume. So at the core, the agent is designed to analyze supplier-driven changes and evaluate their downstream impact across the business. So there are three primary input pathways. So first is the supplier communications. So this typically starts with an email from the supplier or vendor, which is captured and structured into a change request. This then flows into the impact analysis agent for evaluation. Second are the change requests coming through the D365 vendor collaboration module. So these are already structured and can be directly analyzed by the agent. And finally, the third one, they are manual simulations of change. So this is allowing users to test various scenarios and understand the downstream impact. So what's important here is that the impact analysis agent is not dependent on a single channel. It can operate both with and without the supplier communications agent, therefore giving users flexibility to assess impact, whether the change is formally captured, proactively simulated, or received informally, right? Those are the manual simulations we're referring to as well. So this ensures that decision making is always driven by a clear understanding of downstream impact, regardless of how the change originates. So today, when suppliers submit change requests, procurement teams spend significant time manually analyzing the impact. So in many cases, this involves digging through planning data to determine which changes matter and which are safe to accept. In other cases, there is no upfront analysis at all, meaning impacts are only discovered downstream when they actually affect production or, in many cases, customer commitments. Impact analysis addresses this by automatically assessing every incoming change request and classifying it based on whether it has a downstream impact. This includes identifying which sales, production, or transfer orders are affected and whether inventory risks such as stockouts or breaches of minimum levels will occur and when. So, from a business perspective, the value is twofold. First, it significantly reduces manual analysis effort, therefore allowing procurement teams to focus only on changes that truly matter. Second, it improves protection of customer commitments and production schedules by surfacing risks early, enabling faster decision making, better supplier negotiations, and more importantly, proactive mitigation actions. So, in essence, this shifts the organization from a reactive issue management to proactive, impact driven decision making in procurement. So let's talk about the as-is process of purchase order. So purchase order process is largely user-driven and manual from end to end. So if you think about buyers manually follow up with vendors for confirmation and changes, this is typically via email, and then they receive confirmation or change requests from the supplier. So any supplier changes are manually interpreted and updated into the purchase order. There is no system driven validation of impact at the point of change. Now, what then follows is impact analysis, which is performed manually by the buyer, requiring them to manually review downstream data, such as sales orders, production orders, transfer orders, and what have you, check inventory positions and risks such as stockouts and minimum levels. And this analysis is time consuming, inconsistent, and dependent on individual expertise. So, based on this manual assessment, buyers would then classify impacts themselves as there is no impact and therefore accept and update purchase order, or indicate that there is an impact and decide to accept with and without taking further action to mitigate the impact, or reject and engage with the supplier. So, overall, the process is reactive rather than proactive, highly manual with multiple touch points, prone to delays, missed impacts, and a lot of operational risk. When we go to the to be process of purchase order, which becomes more agent assisted and workflow driven, reducing manual touch points, what does that look like? Obviously, with the supplier communications agent, the agent proactively follows up with suppliers by generating draft communications for confirmations or delays. Supplier responses of confirmation or changes are automatically read and interpreted by the agent, and key changes are summarized. Now, the impact analysis agent analyzes the downstream impact across sales, production, and inventory, identifies risks such as stockout, classifies the change that's come in as either it has an impact or there is no impact. So when there is no impact, the buyer can accept the change and the purchase order is updated. Or when there is an impact, guided decision is made to accept, mitigate, or reject with supplier engagement. So decision making is guided and much more simplified, and final updates are executed by the agent with user confirmation, ensuring control with reduced effort. So, as you can see, overall, the process is way more proactive and insight driven, highly automated with minimal manual intervention. It's going to be faster, more consistent, and it's a risk aware execution. So the impact analysis agent is also useful when there is no supplier communication agent and the update to the purchase orders via the vendor collaboration module. So as we indicated earlier, it's not mandatory to have the supplier communications agent for using impact analysis. So using the vendor collaboration module, the supplier can confirm the PO or request for changes to the purchase order. So based on this update, impact analysis agent analyzes the downstream impact, similar to what we are talking in the earlier slide, whether that is regarding sales, production, or inventory. It can identify the risk and can classify the changes as whether it has impact or no impact, and based on which the buyer can accept the change or decide to reject it with supplier engagement, etc. So final updates are executed by the agent with user confirmation. I will now hand it over to Lisa Scholz, who will walk through the use case along with the demo of the analysis agent.
Yes, so let's look at how the procurement agent impact analysis works in some real life use cases with demos. First, let's look at how a purchaser can use it to see if a change communicated or if changes communicated by a supplier have downstream impact. So if we take Contoso Entertainment as an example company, which is a distributor and installer of home electronic equipment, who's purchased speakers, other supplies from various vendors, and they communicate with their vendors via email and also the D365 vendor collaboration module. So Julia is a purchaser at Contoso who uses the procurement agent today to monitor email responses from vendors, and also to follow up with them in case of missing responses or delays. So this is the supplier communications functionality. And she also uses it to evaluate and classify downstream impact of any changes that she does receive. So this is the impact analysis functionality. So she wants to know if any changes communicated by suppliers have operational or commercial impact before she accepts them. So the procurement agent enables her to make informed next step decisions on how to handle changes to her inbound supply and maintain operational continuity. So the impact analysis has been integrated into the supplier communications emails from vendors workspace, as well as the purchase order preparation workspace in the vendor collaboration module. In both workspaces, additional columns called impact have been added to show if there's a change or if a change has impact or no impact. For changes with impact, purchasers will also be able to see more information about what that impact is, which we'll see later on in the demo. Purchase orders marked with in external review in this purchase order preparation workspace signifies that the vendor collaboration module is being used to communicate with that supplier. And this in external review, the requires action part, along with the vendor response status accepted with changes. So the second last column on the page here shows or signifies that the vendor has responded with a change request. So here, the column of impact will then also show no impact or has impact for those in external review requires action and vendor response status accepted with changes. So let's look at the use case of how Julia can review changes that don't have an impact and accept those or apply those changes to the purchase order. So Julia receives 2 change requests from her suppliers, Tailspin Parts and Fabricant supplier, through email and the vendor collaboration module. So she used to spend a lot of time analyzing data for each change that she gets to determine which ones are safe to accept. She can just apply to the purchase order right away, navigating to the purchase order and applying those, and which changes require further action. Now she can simply see that both of these change requests have no downstream impact because they're classified as having no impact. And based on this, Julia just wants to accept both changes, update both purchase orders, move on with her day. And she wants data and dynamics to be up to date and of course also not spend unnecessary time on tasks. So she wants to apply both changes and update the purchase order without having to navigate to the purchase order in Dynamics. So each email processed by supplier communications is now also classified as not only being a confirmation, change request, or other, but change requests are also classified as has impact or no impact. An email communicating a change request is marked as has impact if a change within that email has an impact. So this email, for example, refers to a purchase orders with multiple lines changed, it could be, and both ones that have impact and don't have impact, and in that case, the email would be classified as has impact. So basically, the stat or the no impact or has impact on the left side navigation pane just means that within that email, there is a change that has impact. And in this way, she can scan and look at the ones that have impact first. So navigating down to the lines, she can see that this specific quantity change, this is one from 11 to 6 quantities. This one does not have an impact. This could be, for example, if she has sufficient stock to absorb that change. Here she can just simply click apply all suggestions to accept this change, this quantity change, and apply that to the purchase order without having to go to the actual purchase order in Dynamics. And now for the vendor collaboration module, she can instantly see which change lines have no impact as well. And here she can go in and see the actual change, which we'll also see later, or she can simply confirm it from here by clicking confirm and applying that change to the purchase order. So now let's look at when changes do have a downstream impact and how this new feature helps purchasers handle those change requests. So Julia gets 2 more change requests, one email informing of a delay and a vendor collaboration module message informing of a quantity reduction, both from Fabricant supplier, and the agent classifies both as has impact. So Julia would now like to know what the exact impact is to determine what she should do. So she first uses the impact analysis summary to get a high-level view of the order and inventory impact, if there is one. And then she wants to see specific orders that will be affected, as well as how her inventory levels will look like after the change. So by instantly identifying changes with impact, she can act quickly, such as having follow-up conversations with the supplier to negotiate better terms. This could be whether they can expedite their production or the delivery, the transportation. Can they deliver partial quantities? Can they split the delivery, or can they offer her any other options that she can then apply before just accepting that change? So, and then she can also try to see if there are other options before it's too late. So she can quickly identify which changes have impact that she should react to first to minimize production and customer impact. So let's look at a demo. So of how she can review changes with impact if using supplier communications. So you can access the workspace both on the immersive home, purchase orders, updates from vendors, or by going to procurement sourcing, supplier communications, emails from vendors. And then in this example, there is a vendor that has communicated a delay to the entire purchase order. So supplier communications has recognized this date change on the purchase order header, which is the first table. And then it's propagated that delay to all lines in the purchase order. And then impact analysis has checked if the delay on each line has an impact. So 2 lines in this case are classified as has impact, which was why the impact on the header as well also says has impact, as well as on the lines. So clicking view details will then show exact orders that are impact along with any linked orders. And it also show projected inventory levels factoring the change, and if and when inventory breach will occur. So that can be if breaching the minimum, the safety stock level that's defined for that item, or if inventory goes below 0. So here we saw that the purchase order delay of line 1, or of the entire purchase order but then propagated to line 1, will affect a chain of purchase order. And then if you click, eventually there is a sales order at the end. So let's say this impacted customer is one of Contoso's priority customers. And also there will be a stock out of copper wire, if we imagine that that's a critical component for Contoso, and that actually we can see that we will be minus 400 on the 10th of August. So Julia can use this information to evaluate further action. That she classifies this as a critical situation. So she decides that she wants to follow up with the supplier, see if there's any options that they can offer her. So if nothing's possible, or if nothing makes sense to do, then she can accept the change, again, by going back to click apply all changes or all suggestions. And then she now knows who in her organization to inform. Could be the sales responsible for the impacted sales order, and so on. So she knows who she needs to inform because she knows what exactly the impact will be. So if we go on to see the same flow from the vendor collaboration module, so if you start by opening the purchase order preparation workspace and then navigating to this tab that we talked about in external review requires action. So this one purchase order is marked as has impact because one or more change lines in the purchase order has a downstream impact. So the same concept as with the email. And here you can see that this purchase order contains 3 lines that have been changed, all quantity reductions, and all of them have impact. So yeah, you navigated here by going to the view response on latest sent order to see and navigate between each line. And then you can see the same page that we also saw before on the supplier communications email from vendors workspace, see the same list of directly and indirectly impacted orders, as well as inventory impact graph. And yeah, as well, this is also something you can do on the other emails from vendors workspace, is navigate between the lines in that email, and then see the impact analysis. Yes, so now let's look at the next use case, which is the one we mentioned before, the manual simulation. So Julia may also want to see if changes to purchase orders that haven't been directly communicated through email or through the vendor collaboration module, if those have a downstream impact. So here she can use the impact simulation feature of the procurement agent. So this could be if she gets changes communicated through other sources, let's say an upcoming likely delay is mentioned in a phone call she has with one of her suppliers, she can use the simulation feature to check if that would have a downstream impact on orders or inventory or both. So it could also be if she wants to be on top of her inbound orders by proactively checking if potential changes that have not been directly communicated would have a downstream impact. This could be if in the supplier communications outbound follow-up functionality has identified purchase orders for which no reply has been received yet, or ones that are already delayed. Then she can be on top of understanding if a small or if a large delay would have what kind of downstream impact that would have. So she could also use this feature if she gets a proposal from a supplier to expedite an order, especially if it comes in a higher cost. She can, or from a carrier, if they offer her a choice to expedite at a cost, she can compare to see if this new date would reduce or eliminate an impact. So if it would be worth it to explore. And also, of course, other use cases. These are just some. So let's look at this simulation feature. So it's in the all purchase order page. So basically you navigate to any purchase order, and then within the top purchase order navigation pane, you'll see the impact simulation section, and then a button to simulate changes. So here I've just chosen a purchase order and then click simulate changes. And then you can simulate a quantity change or a date change to a specific line or to the header. And then if you change the date of the header, then that date will then be reflected on all of the lines, and you'll be able to see a separate impact analysis for each purchase order line. So the impact analysis is always done for a purchase order line change. So here the same overview. So if there are any orders impacted, here there's one sales ordered, which has been traced through pegging, and this is the customer at the end is Contoso Retail, and then she can also navigate to that order in Dynamics by viewing the customer, viewing the order, and then this specific case doesn't have an inventory impact, so the change does not cause her inventory level to go below 0 or go below her minimum level for that item, but she can still use the graph to see how it impacts her inventory level, even if there's no direct inventory breach. So yeah, that was a run through of the features. Now let's look at how does impact analysis actually work, or how does it determine if there has impact or if there's no impact of a change. So the impact analysis uses demand, supply, and inventory data that is available in Dynamics to determine if there is downstream impact. So the source of truth for impact analysis is the impacted orders and then the inventory projection. So we had the section on impacted orders and the section on the impacted inventory with the graph. So let's start with the impacted orders. It first looks at if there's any sales, production, transfer orders as kind of the main orders, but it will also surface safety stock orders or impacted forecasts. So for production orders, it then also traces links and BOM levels to show directly and indirectly impacted orders. Also, for example, if there's a transfer order, then links to a production order, another production order, and then sales order at the end. So it also shows the link traces that changed, impacted purchase order down the link to show which orders will be impacted as a result of that change. Also important to note, if there are any projects linked to this affected or disrupted supply, it will also be shown in the impacted orders table as a project link. So if using Dynamics planning or planning optimization or classic planning, this order information will be based. Sorry, I have to take a sip of water. There we go. So if using Dynamics planning, this will be based on explicit physical inventory markings and master plan peggings. Okay, I just need to cough, sorry. Okay, there we go. And if using external planning systems, it'll then use markings and reservations if these are available in Dynamics. So it then also looks at inventory projections. So this is the second element. We had impacted orders and then inventory projections. So inventory projections will then see if purchase order line change will cause inventory levels to go below minimum levels or 0, so if there will be a stock out. So it does this by using net requirements from the default dynamic plan to return on hand before the change and after the change, which were also the two lines on the graph. And also, if there's no plan, it then falls back to the available to promise ATP data. So the projections are never blank. So it can use net requirements data based on the default dynamic plan, or it can use the available to promise ATP sales data. So based on this, it then determines if a change has impact or no impact. So if it has impact, then it will produce an AI-generated impact summary, which we saw, a list of directly and indirectly impacted orders if that data is available. And also, for example, if there's this change list of orders, which I explained. And it'll also show information about inventory impact. So if inventory levels go below minimum or zero, it'll highlight when this event will occur as well. Also, what the new inventory level would be. We saw before it then inventory levels were going to be minus 400 after the change. All right, so then let's move on how to configure impact analysis. So in feature management, we now have procurement agent features. So we have procurement agent supplier communications, and we have procurement agent impact analysis. So if using impact analysis on its own, only the last one, procurement agent impact analysis feature needs to be enabled. If using impact analysis with supplier communications to automatically identify the downstream impact of incoming emails, then both the procurement agent supplier communications and impact analysis need to be enabled. So as soon as the procurement agent impact analysis feature has been enabled, you can then use the manual simulation feature that I explained before. So that the manual simulation feature doesn't require any additional configurations, but if you want impact analysis to be triggered for any change that comes in, then that needs to be configured. And I'll show you that on the next slide. So this is in agent management, this is where all the configurations are for the agents. So if using impact analysis with supplier communications, besides obviously setting up the features in feature management, then you also need two configurations, or at least two configurations. First, there needs to be at least one configuration for the supplier communications, the inbound part. So that is the supplier communications feature for reading inbound emails. So there needs to be at least one configuration set up for that. And that needs to be for all or for specific vendors and for a specific mailbox here. Then there also needs to be a configuration for impact analysis, which is the last one in this list, show impact of changes to purchase orders. And this one is to automatically show the impact of any changes received through the selected source, which is here will be vendor emails. And then it'll apply to the configuration or the configurations that you have for supplier communication. So it will then run the impact analysis for any changes that are subject to configurations for supplier communications, so for vendor specified and for mailboxes specified. So let's move on and see configuration for if you just want to use impact analysis with vendor collaboration module, so without impact analysis. Then you don't need the first one, you just need to show impact of changes in purchase orders. And then in the drop-down, this is a drop-down that says sources, and you then select the vendor collaboration module as a source. Now on to Ahmed for the technical architecture walkthrough.
Thank you, Lisa. So I will take you in a quick walk through the system design and technical architecture of impact analysis. To start off, we had some requirements and made some decisions based on the requirements, and then filled the gaps with the reasonable assumptions. First, we wanted impact analysis to react any type of disruption that happens on a purchase order line level. So it should be able to extend to any module in the system that interacts with a purchase order line. Currently, we support 3 scenarios that Lisa has been through: the supplier communication agent inbound email, vendor acknowledging with a change through vendor collaboration module, and of course the what if simulation case. And second, we wanted the analysis to be asynchronous. Based on our data that some purchase orders can contain a lot of lines changes. And this, of course, is a costly operation. So we wanted this to happen on the background. Also, one of the input methods we have is supplier communication agent, which is also asynchronous. The systems we interact with, Copilots, the LLM, the agent needs some time to reason, and it's also rate limited. And then we took a decision that one line will have one job and then we'll generate one impact. So impact across lines or across purchase orders is not aggregated. This made it simple for us to design around. And also we have some concrete points that each line will associate with a single impact that's very clear in the system. In case if we have a change on the header level of the purchase order, this change will fan out to all the lines. And of course, our UX will show the impact per line. And finally, job model is shared and extensible. So all the triggers, currently 3, share the same job model. So the surface area we have to scale and extend is small and easy to deal with. And now I will show you, walk you quickly through the system design. So we have 3 systems interacting with each other: finance and operations, F&O, Dataverse, middle layer that contains the Power Automate and some Dataverse table to store the result, and finally Copilot Studio, which hosts the reasoning, the model that's doing the reasoning on the input data. So from left to right, the finance and operations contain canvas background. Canvas is blue, contains 4 major components: the triggers, which is in dark blue, procurement agent, vendor collaboration, and the what if simulation. And once a trigger happens, this goes to the job management piece, which is in green. So we have some job queuing SQL table, and we have a pulling mechanism that is a recurrent batch job in F&O. This batch job is configurable, so the user can run it more often or less often, depends on how much they value impact analysis. One small caveat here, one small thing to take care of, that simulation flow, because the user, you would like to see the impact on the spot. So this have an instant trigger, so it doesn't get queued in the queue. It immediately goes to be computed. Then in orange, we have our source of truth. So the agent needs some grounded data to reason over, and this is why we have custom APIs to pull this concrete data from F&O. The data are inventory projection. This is done through the dynamic plan net requirements, and it's time bucketed data. And then we have the impacted orders, which we go through peggings, markings, and projects, and also invent trends table to get this concrete information about what are the pieces in the system that are linked to this purchase order line. And of course, finally, the UX, where you can see the result. After a job is queued and pulled, the job management module, the background job, will trigger the Power Automate flow that's in the Dataverse, the middle layer. And the Power Automate flow will pull in all the information needed for this job to be completed. So it pulls in all the inventory projections and all the impacted orders from F&O using custom APIs. And after gathering all the information, the Power Automate flow will call MCS, Microsoft Copilot Studio, that will reason over the input and generate the summary, detect if there is a impact or not, and then, of course, give us the result back to Dataverse. And after the result is written to Dataverse, the user will pull it from the F&O UX. That was it for the technical architecture. Back to you, Lisa.
Yes, so now let's talk about the timeline of the procurement agents. or for impact analysis procurement agent, we went private preview early this year with some select customers, and we're testing it out, collecting feedback. And then in May, as part of 10048, we went production ready preview. So that's already out now. And we also are in production, the same production ready public preview with supplier communications. So both impact analysis and supplier communications are in production ready public preview in 10048. So the GA date is TBD for both. But we're continuing to add enhancements and add features to both the supplier communications and impact analysis, as well as the procurement agent as a whole. So it's not like we're just releasing in production ready public preview. We're continuing to make it even better. Now let's talk about monetization, Copilot credits, licenses. So there are two elements making up the Copilot credit consumption for the procurement agent impact analysis. So the first is the number of purchase order line change requests that are received through the sources that have been configured, including manual simulation requests. So if both vendor emails and vendor collaboration have been configured to automatically trigger the impact analysis for incoming change requests, then the number of change requests will then be one of the factors contributing to the Copilot Studio credit consumption. So out of all of the responses received, impact analysis will only automatically run and consume credits for change requests. So not for confirmations or for any other messages received from vendors. Also for the vendor collaboration module was only the accepted with changes status that triggers the impact analysis. So it's not going to just run for every messages received. So it's only also going to run based on the configuration, specifically if using supplier communications. So it's going to be for besides the chosen sources, the chosen mailboxes and vendors. It runs per line, per purchase order line, and not per email or per purchase order. So in this example, I've just assumed 100 purchase order line change requests received through a month through these sources, as well as manual simulations. And the second element making up the credit consumption is then the recurrence of the job that Ahmed mentions that checks for new change requests. So the interval at which this job runs is also configurable. So the smaller the interval, the sooner you'll be able to see the impact analysis results on incoming change requests. So a longer interval, like the one that's being used in this example, 60 minutes, would mean that if a new change request coming in, you wouldn't immediately see if that has a downstream impact or not. So if it's critical to see them, then we recommend a smaller job recurrence. But we're also looking at other ways of solving this. So the same licenses that are required for supplier communications are also applied to impact analysis. So that is the premium licenses or the D365 licenses. And the impact analysis will be added to the Copilot credit estimator. So I don't believe it's there yet, but we've given all the input and it will be included as along with supplier communications in the Copilot credit estimator here. Okay. So let's move on to some resources. So we have Microsoft Learn documentation published with much more detailed information that than we've explained today. So if you want to refer back, you can go and read in general about the procurement agent, as well about the impact analysis specifically. And as I mentioned, the Copilot credit estimator with the impact analysis to be added. So these are some useful resources about impact analysis.
Okay, we're now open for Q&A. If you did have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or you can put it in the Q&A section as well. So I can see a couple of questions. So there's one which says, will the impact simulation also be available for production orders in the future?
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the procurement agent, and we know that there is definitely potential of looking at any change. So it's not just purchase order changes that have the potential to impact operations and customers. So we for sure know that there is potential to expand this kind of functionality to other areas. But I don't have any like dates to share about when something like this will be available for production, but it's good to understand that there's also interest in that.
Great, thanks. And I think the other question is the impact analysis considering the whole BOM structure? And is it also considering the master planning data, such as activities, delays, and all of that?
Yeah, I think we covered this, so it will show linked BOMs, yes, and as any master planning data that's available using markings, peggings. I don't know, Amit, do you have anything to add there, or I think we
Yes,
probably
I can add more
covered. Yeah.
tech details here. So yes, it covers the entire BOM structure. Recursively, it pulls in all the information. Currently, we have a limit of 200 nodes. Sometimes the BOM structure can explode out of control. So we have 200 nodes using breadth first search algorithm. So it will, for each line, it will take the breadth search for 200 nodes and then it will break. If, of course, you have less than 200 any order, the entire BOM structure will be parsed.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.